Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is episode number 34, and today Maggie and I are going to return to our discussion of the Peter Jackson films, which I think we're going to be doing intermittently for, who knows, quite a while, perhaps. Yeah, well, that's true, presumably.
Well, I feel like I'm already too overwhelmed with this entire conversation because it's like, you know, what you've wanted to talk about for 20 odd years. So you first start talking about it and it's like, where do we begin?
Right.
Yeah, so I hope this is the one of many.
Right,
it's more
exactly.
like an introduction to the introduction.
It is. And I've been reflecting on something ever since last time. I was realizing that I have a realization about my own patterns, which has led me to a theory, sort of a more general theory. Let's see what you think. So I find and reflecting back upon our discussion from last time, I realized that it's so easy for me to slip back into cataloging differences.
Yes.
You know, just being like, it's different in that way. Oh, but it's different in this other way. Like once you start asking those questions, like once you start thinking in those terms, it just keeps coming, right? And
there's nothing wrong with that. It's
like observing the differences
you know?
is totally fine. Yeah, it's totally fine. But I find the more I get myself into that mentality, the harder it is to like obey my own first dictum about adaptations, which is that you have to consider it as a work of art on its own. If you don't get past merely observing, these are the ways in which it's different. Yeah. And instead say, okay, right, good, but hang on a sec, for a moment, forget the original and what is actually happening in the film itself, so that then we can make an educated comparison. Then you're not getting anywhere. You're not really treating it as what it deserves to be viewed as, which is a work of art on its own.
But also, I similarly have been thinking about this a lot since last week. It has been real interesting to just see it through different eyes too, you know, so I feel like this is, no matter who you go to the cinema with and you watch it with different people, you get different perspectives. But doing this alongside you, when you told me coming into it that you really followed a bell curve of loving, hating, loving this. No, hating, loving, hating this.
Yes.
Hate's a bit strong at the end.
Hate way strong at the end. Yeah.
But it was because I rewatched it again over the last 2 nights, and rewatching it with kind of your voice in my head and having the very minimal mentions of Morgoth and the very minimal mentions of all these other things that obviously now I know a whole lot more about. It's just been like, oh, I can see how this would really take you off.
Yeah,
I just came to it and enjoyed the story, and they did such a good job. I have very few qualms with it because they just pulled off this incredible storytelling ability. But when you know where it came from and what they skipped over and how they adapted things, it's hard to not notice that.
It's hard to not notice it.
And really hard for those changes to not be obnoxiously obvious.
And that's something that led me to another really interesting question, which was, why is it? Because this has been true from the beginning, and it's hard because it's not apples to apples, but like, why is it that I actually still to this day struggle more with the Peter Jackson films, as far as like not sliding into that, but they did that wrong, but they changed that, oh wait, I don't like that because it's different. I struggle more with that with the Peter Jackson films than I do the Rings of Power.
Well, you've had 20 years to grow as a watcher.
That's one reason why it's not apples to apples, right?
Yeah.
But I think also, on reflection, I believe that part of it is simply the fact that the Peter Jackson films are a retelling adaptation and the Rings of Power are not. Like, I know that they're filling in the gaps, right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons why I have also found the kind of, like, I'm going to catalog differences response to the Rings of Power frankly puzzling, because there's almost nothing to catalog differences from. There's no source text directly. I mean it's not comparable.
You could literally create spreadsheets from fellowship to fellowship, right?
Yeah.
Like you could say, here's the line from the text and here's what they showed on screen. In fact, people have done that.
Right.
So, like, that exists. You can't do that with Rings of Power.
You can't, because there's no analog. And I mean, it's not to say that you can't notice that there are differences from what writings Tolkien has done. You know, there are things that they've changed, and you can notice those changes, and you can even be very sensitive to some of those changes. Or, I mean, you can be as sensitive as you like to any change, I suppose. But I find the experience very, very different in that way. But I wonder if maybe that's me. That is, like, I wonder if different people struggle differently. Like, for me, I struggle more with retelling adaptations. Like, if it's setting out to say, like, I'm doing that story, then it automatically sets me into, like, okay, I'm taking notes. Like, I'm ready. And again, I feel the same way, and I know my wife feels even more strongly the same way whenever we watch an Austen adaptation, right? It's, if they claim to be doing a retelling, if they're like, okay, here is Mansfield Park, we're like, all right, we've got our Mansfield Park hats on, we know what to expect, and we're ready for it. And anything you do, like, you change the name of Lady Bartram's dog, and we're going to be on you like a dog on a pork chop, right? I mean, like, it's like, that's the mentality,
that's
right?
what you expect. Like, I've definitely worked this into talks before, but like one of the first drafts of the Twilight adaptation before the one that we know was where Bella's a track star at Brigham Young University and Edward is a convict on the run from the FBI. No mention of vampires in that whole thing. Like, why even call it Twilight? You know, there's so many versions of script like that where it's like, why are you even calling it the same thing? That's a totally different story, and you're only going to piss off the people it's attached to. But that exists.
And again, I mean, I in other words, like, basically the discipline that I've been trying to build over the last 20 years is, like, actively detaching that, you know, like pushing the clutch pedal down and detaching from that gear entirely, and just trying not to go there in my head as much as possible, and instead just be like, okay, oh, look, you know, here's a movie which happens to be called Mansfield Park. Oh, and look, and there's a character who happens to be named Fanny Price, but I'm not thinking about Fanny Price from the book. I'm trying to just think about the Fanny Price character that they're building in this story. And I'm going to try to wait to do my comparisons and contrasts until after I see what they're doing and how it works. Because that's really the problem, right? The problem is if you start knocking it for every difference that exists, you don't see the costs and benefits. I mean, each of those changes is a choice, right? And each of those choices comes with costs and benefits, and you don't see the benefits. You feel the costs, but you don't see the benefits. And it may well be that the story is that the film story is doing something different, something interesting, or even approaching a similar thing from a different angle because it has to take a different route there through the storytelling. Anyway, and those are the kinds of things that, like, once you get into cataloging mode, you can't see, you literally can't see it because you're not seeing the film.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, you know, one of the things we talked about with book versus film versus book, which do you go first and all of that. Like, I think that's one of the cases where it becomes most clear. Like, if I watch a film first and then read a book, I tend to get so much more out of the book, and it's completely separate to the thing that I just watched because you have so much more content coming at you. So the visuals that I'm, like, creating in my head, there's a bunch of theorists that talk about this, Deborah Cartmel and not Imelda Staunton, that's the actress, Imelda Wellahan. They talk
Imelda
about
Staunton is the actress who played
the Queen.
Umbridge. Yeah, that's what I thought. She was killing it as Queen Elizabeth, by the way,
amazing.
in The Crown.
She was anything really she does, just magical. Yeah. But she does not discuss adaptation theory, so that's Imelda Wellahan. But they talk a lot, and Ian Hunter's the other one. They all talk about, like, if you watch something and you see, like, the Daily Prophet is the example they use, you see the Daily Prophet from Harry Potter on screen, then you didn't have the freedom to create that in your own mind, and you lose a lot of that personal attachment to the text. So a lot of people who see films first and then read the books can absolutely still become fans, but there isn't this, like, possessiveness that tends to come from books first. And I feel like with Tolkien and Rings of Power versus Fellowship, we're doing this major comparison.
Yes.
And I've owned this text, big book fan that, you know, person X is for 50 plus years. Whereas
Right.
Rings of Power, like, I don't know, some people probably can get just as angry about that because they think they are that Tolkien person and therefore know it better than anyone on the planet could adapt it to be. But it is just,
Yeah,
like you said, it's not apples to apples, but
that's a not insignificant demographic, but I agree, it's not the same situation. And you're right. I think I'm one of those people, because I've had a sort of, I've had a pretty shameless book bias over films most of my life, right? I've always, from goodness, like high school on, basically had the rule that, like, I never wanted to watch an adaptation until I'd read the book. So if
yeah.
I was going
And
to
that's how
see
most
something,
people feel about it.
yeah, I mean, unless it was something I was totally not committed, like really invested in at all. But like I usually, I'm like, oh no, hang on, I'm gonna wait. I'm waiting till I read the book. I'm waiting till I've read the book. I think I'm gonna change that rule. I think I'm gonna undertake. I'm gonna, like, when I find myself in that situation, I'm going to deliberately choose to watch the film first and then read the book second.
Yeah, I mean, like, sometimes you don't have that luxury, and if it's something I'm working on or something, I most likely will have done the book first, because then you do get to pull out that kind of level of microscopic inspection. But if we're not just talking enjoyment, heck yeah, I'm gonna watch the film first and then get my own personal special features DVD when I read the book, because it's so much more information.
Right.
And it takes out, I mean, you have the visuals from the film in your head, but I do think it takes out some of the other stuff that I don't find the changes, because if you use the film as the primary text, I don't find the changes that jarring, because you have so much time to lead up to whatever it is. It makes sense. So, just the fact that there's a Tom Bombadil in the book, I'm not like, wait, what? Well, I am a little bit. He's a bit odd, but
most people have that reaction to Tom Bombadil.
Have that reaction anyway. Poor choice.
Yeah. No. But I see exactly what you mean. And that is interesting. So anyway, so all of this is a sort of preamble up to saying that I want to return, as we return here to our Peter Jackson discussion, I want to make sure I'm doing the thing. I'm going back and looking at the film and talking about the film, and thinking about the choices that they've made first and foremost on their own terms. Following my own advice, I have been advising people, and through the discussions of the Rings of Power, to think strongly twice before using words like right and wrong. Like, they got that wrong. No, they changed a thing, and you can decide, if you can make an educated decision on whether or not you think that change to be good or bad, advantageous or disadvantageous. But it's not about right and wrong. It's about similarity and difference. It's about comparison and contrast.
Interpretation and meaning, and
exactly.
all these other
all
things.
Those things. So, but even apart from using words like right and wrong, I'm going to. So let's do the thing where. So we were wanting to focus in on a couple characters and then on a couple segments of the film to kind of dig a little bit deeper. We've been speaking very generally, bringing up a few examples here and there, but we wanted to be a little bit more systematic. Well, not exactly systematic. We're not going through the whole film scene by scene.
Systematic. We're gonna try.
We're gonna go just a little deeper. Yeah.
I was also saying to Corey, I find this really difficult to discuss film when I can't, like, freeze frame stuff, because every time I did it for Rings of Power, you're watching a scene and I'm talking about it as we go. But then I was like, oh wait, we're gonna do that. So
we're gonna do that. We have plans for that. Yeah.
So for this, we're just going to use some images that I pulled. And apologies if they're maybe from a game or maybe from low resolution. I literally did it 6 minutes before this, before we started up tonight.
Yeah. So we want to begin with a discussion of Elrond's character. So first, let's think about the Peter Jackson film and the character of Elrond that they establish. It's important, I think, that we first see him in the prologue, right? Very important, because of all of the characters we see in the prologue, we only get a few points of contact with the rest of the film, right? Galadriel with her voiceover and her brief appearance in accepting an elven ring, and then Elrond on the battlefield, right? So he is established by the film as a piece of visual continuity between the past and the present, and he is one of those two sort of historical anchors that the film gives us. There aren't any others. I think it's just the two of them. The other elves that they give are all dead by the Third Age, and so they're all like extras.
And he's kind of the primary resource because he's not just sharing a memory from when he was alive. He was physically next to him at Isildur, trying to get him to throw the ring in.
Exactly. Yeah, we saw him, and so that, yes, that comes in the flashback when he's talking to Gandalf, right? The when he's explaining it's kind of an extension of his men are weak discussion, right? That he segues to the I was there Gandalf and okay, so
word for word,
right? So through that moment, we get the sort of reminder, right? We see him again. And just in case we've forgotten him from the prologue, we see him back with Isildur there at Mount Doom. Interesting also remembering off the top of my head, the difference between Elrond, who's standing and giving orders in the line of battle there at the beginning, and Elrond in the Cracks of Doom, right? At the Cracks of Doom with Isildur. He's all bloody and dirty and beat up, right? It's immediately post battle, right? So you can see this is Elrond who has suffered and been through a lot there. That's clearly the context that they're and the way that it's Maggie, you will remember all this stuff better than I do, but doesn't it fade back into his modern face? The cut from the flashback to the
I don't remember.
It's something pretty. I feel like we get a pretty clear visual juxtaposition between.
I do feel like it's a match, almost a match. I can't remember. I'm gonna watch it last night. I'm gonna have to take a look at that scene specifically. But I definitely remember the super extreme close up of cast it into the fire, and the next thing
destroy
is
it.
his face.
Yes, Isildur. Right, and then we return to his face as he's talking to Gandalf. Right. So again, showing the continuity, showing also that the progress of time. He doesn't look older, right? He's not supposed to look older. But even though now he's all cleaned up and looking like the Lord of Rivendell, he it is. The emotion is still there, right? The rawness of that, like his opinion of men, right, and what he grounds his opinions of men on is still clearly like the impression I get from that scene. It's all boiling right under the surface still.
And that's what I started thinking about with this viewing, because now obviously we've seen Rings of Power. And just the comparison of like the Elrond of Jackson and the Elrond Rings of Power is just interesting, because you're like, oh, he's, a young politician, aspiring, upstart kind of, you go get him, jaunty humor, versus the terrifying, really resigned, kind of heavy anger. And then being able to look at the span of time that Elrond has covered and what he's carried with him for so long, it just makes a lot of sense. And I know these two didn't work together, but in terms of characterization and how they're projected, I thought it was really well done. We've got this massive arc of this innocent, light, happy-go-lucky kind of guy who obviously young Elrond has his own demons and stuff, but we don't really have a lot of that in the first season of Rings of Power. It's all optimism and friendship and flat-out joy sometimes. And then you carry that through to Elrond towards the end.
He does not... Young Elrond does not yet have any of the scars that old Elrond has, and that's what is emphasized, right?
I can't picture young Elrond leading battle. He doesn't strike me as any kind of antagonistic, vicious warrior.
Right, and we're obviously going to get there, not only because we have reason to believe that we will based on the story that we know, but that was even foreboded within season 1 of the Rings of Power when Elrond makes his vow to Galadriel way back in episode 1, where he says to her, I promise you that if it should turn out that you were right, I will not rest until, this evil is eliminated. So, he has promised to go to war.
Yeah. He's made a few oaths, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has taken several oaths. Anyway, that's seems part of the trajectory to come within the Rings of Power. But yeah, you think about the initial frame, because all of the stuff that we've been talking about Jackson's Elrond is very much part of the frame of that character, like what we see from him in the prologue, and then that initial segment. Of course, I mean, I guess then you could say also part of the frame of him is as the healer and Lord of Rivendell, as we see, you know, his face as Frodo comes back to consciousness and stuff. But that scene with Gandalf, the Men Are Weak scene, is really his first scene where we're being introduced to him as a character, other than those other, you know, shots. You know, so that in the context of those other glimpses that we've received earlier, especially with how that first scene doubles down on that connection with the flashback, this is the frame that we're being given for his character. And so like it's like scarred, emotionally scarred, if not physically scarred, is the primary thing that is conveyed to us. I mean, yes, longevity, wisdom, I don't want to take away from the other. I'm not saying that's it, but I'm not trying to oversimplify his character, but it's a major element.
And it's much darker, and it is very resigned to almost not giving up on Middle Earth, because he's not doing that by any means, but he's ready to leave, right? Like, he's like, our time is over. We're out, you know?
Yes.
And that's not the Elrond that we meet in Rings of Power. So yeah, seeing that kind of level in the Jackson one, and also that moment, I remember this from when I saw it when I was like 19. That moment where Gandalf screams the you're gonna say the language, the dark tongue, the
black speech,
the black speech. Never in these lands have the black speech been uttered. And just hearing Elrond's, you know, anger at that, it was just really powerful. But it felt very like territorial, like Rivendell is still mine. Don't bring that in here.
You've just like polluted my exactly. Yeah.
You can do it in the rest of the world. You've already mucked it all up. Don't do this here.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about that in this kind of context, because you're also right that Sorry. This is such a good exercise. Like, I already feel better. I already feel better because it's so hard not to. Well, all right, I will use a strong, charged word. It's hard not to pollute my reaction and analysis of the film with knowledge from the book, right? Another dangerous word, slightly less dangerous than right and wrong, is the word should. You know, they should have done this. This is what he should be like.
I wish they had done. Very powerful.
Or like, if I had done it, I would have done it this way for these reasons, which is a perfectly excellent discussion to have. And you know, many people, goodness knows, those of you who listen to my 3 years of podcasts on the Hobbit films will know that I have no problem with people ultimately choosing their own, you know, theoretical adaptation over the actual. Like, that's fine. I've had that experience too. And there are many
incredible fan fiction that is way better than things that actual Hollywood has turned out.
Absolutely. But anyway, but saying should puts that in a completely wrong footing, right? As if like your choices are objectively right and theirs are objectively wrong, and that's certainly not there may be some cases where your choice might be better than theirs, and many people might agree with you, but that still doesn't make it a question of objective correct or incorrect.
And here we are with the language again, like, who says it's better, who says it's all individual.
It is. But anyway, okay, all right, so but back to Elrond. So back to your point about the black speech, which I agree is really, really cool, because you are right. And here is the thing that was inspiring me to say how much I'm enjoying this, because normally I hadn't processed this fully, because I'm thinking too much about book Elrond. But you're right. Movie Elrond is not explicitly isolationist. Like, he's not saying we're going to keep to ourselves and we want nothing to do with the outside world. That's not his dynamic there. However,
I mean, he's
what he
is doing,
right? What he is doing is threatening to give up, right? The whole, like, you know, the list of our allies grows thin line that he gives to Gandalf basically is like, so, like, white flag time, I'll
Right.
It's all aboard for
tried.
Valinor, right? Like
Yeah.
that's kind of, the solution. I mean, and the way in which he pushes this to Arwen shows that this is the direction that he's thinking, and it's one of the things that I remember struggling with about the movies at first, when Elrond seems like so resistant to, relying on Aragorn, to, Gandalf's suggestions, basically, about what they do. I'm like, okay, Elrond, so what's your plan? Like, if not that, then what? Right? There's no plan B. If it's not going to work out with Aragorn, then you got nothing, right?
Right.
But I think what I was overlooking there, he does have something, which is departure, right? Just to concede that it's not going to happen, that they can't win, and that the best, most honorable, and even most valiant thing that is within his means is for him personally to... Notice he's not like on the next boat out of town, right? He's not being a coward.
He's tying up loose ends.
He's tying up loose ends and being a kind of rear guard or something, right? Yeah. Like, I'm gonna stay here. Like, I'll be on the last ship out, but we're gonna start loading the ships, right?
But I'm out.
But I mean, everybody, what can be done? Nothing is gonna work.
But he is holding the summit, but he is delivering the sword. But he is, there is enough that shows you he is still committed to that original oath. And when you think about it in terms of thousands of years of work, I can't blame the guy for wanting a vacation from Middle-earth.
Well, and from being a little salty about the fact that he's been, I mean, to this is dangerous. Hang on. You might remember better than I do. This is another thing. I'm like, wait, did they say this in the movie or was it just in the book? Does Galadriel say that she and Celeborn have been fighting the long defeat? Is that line in the film? Fighting the long defeat? So. Is that phrase there? Okay.
Somebody will correct us, but I don't think so. That does not ring a bell.
All right. She didn't say that. Yeah, I don't remember it coming out of Cate Blanchett's mouth. I'm trying.
Her talking about the battle. She just talks about.
No, it's in her introduction. She uses that just to characterize their time in Middle-earth. It's a very striking characterization in the book. Okay, yeah, all right. Several people think no, it's not. It's not in the film. All right, so I won't quote that then. In regards to Elrond, because it's not. If it's not in the film, it's not safe. I don't want to just import, but still, the idea of he has been, again, we first saw him on the front lines of battle, right? And so there's this sense in which his character keeps that, sort of retains that. And so this idea of him, so even the way that he's sending Arwen off, it's not like, because I want to be parted from you, right? Because, I mean, it's not explicitly stated, I think. I don't think he ever says, so the only viable option here is that all the elves just need to leave right now. It's time to start the mass, emigration. Like, we're all giving up. Everybody surrender. Like, well, not surrender, but flee, right? Yeah. Everybody flee. We're all giving up. He didn't say that, but I think that seems to be implied in his trying to send Arwen away. Right, I want to send you away before it gets too dangerous. I'm going to stay with some others, and we might die. Like the Dark Lord might take over and come for us, and we'll hold him off as long as we can. But I want you and as many as can to escape before that, and then eventually, again, I don't see any other prospect of rescue there. Yes. What was it? Malandra is saying, Elrond was very insistent to Gandalf that my people are leaving these shores never to return. Yeah. Again, he doesn't like he manages to avoid, which I think is actually, the more I think about it, the more I think it's a really delicate line that they walk in the script of the film, because they don't want to make Elrond sound like a coward, right? They don't want to make him sound like well, he does sound like a jerk. They don't want to make
he doesn't sound
grumpy. He's grumpy.
He sounds informed and angry,
Informed and angry,
Yeah, like a lobbyist.
right. With bitter experience behind him. Yeah. Anyway, but like they could make him sound. What would be one or two steps back from traitor? That is like betraying the cause of the good guy. Like I'm gonna abdicate, right? I'm gonna leave the field. Like that would be a bad look, right? And so they don't make him say those things. They don't make him do, and yet, I think within the film fairly clearly convey that seems to be, unless some miracle does in fact happen, that's the plan.
The thing with Elrond though is like, I like that he's salty. I like that. That's a great word for him. I like that he's salty and then he's a bit bitter about how things have gone on. But his main role as filmic Elrond is to drive things forward. You know, I can't remember what he is from the book, to be perfectly honest. It's been a long time. But the main scenes that we get from Elrond in Fellowship, well, and I guess across the whole trilogy, is pulling people together for that summit, making decisions, moving forward, bringing the sword. You know, it's a lot of wisdom, but it's a lot of facilitating. It's like whatever he does moves us to the next step. The only real personal arc or character development that we get is his relationship with Arwen, which is completely, not fictitious, but drawn out from text. And that is only to facilitate Arwen's character arc. It doesn't really add much to his own, I don't think. And how they shoot it is always with Arwen taking the center of that conversation and the center of that emotion. You knew there was life and things like that. So it's more about her emotional reaction in contrast to him.
Yeah. And if I could for a second, I want to call timeout, not on you, but on some of our viewers here.
No. What's happening?
Play along, people. Right? Many of you are making observations from the books and applying them to this conversation. Those are irrelevant to this conversation. The game here, right? If you're going to do this properly, look at me using pejorative words, right? But if you're going to give this a shot and really think about the choices that they're making fairly, the only evidence that you can adduce for this conversation about Elrond's character is from the films.
But this is a safe space for us to say,
it's okay.
But what about all these other things? Of course.
Yeah.
But
we can come back to those
evaluator.
things. Yeah, we can come back to those things. But I want to make sure that people
frankly, I'm quite curious about those
that.
things, because I think that's one of the reasons I was excited to chat with you, because I'm like, I love this development of Arwen's story and her relationship with Aragorn and the the butting heads with her dad, all this stuff that's so relatable to any human watcher, but also just works really well in this Peter Jackson created world. I just wonder how that felt as a text fan.
Yeah, well, of course, the Arwen situation is a complicated one.
Fraught.
It's fraught because Arwen was, frankly, a last-second add-on to the books. Yeah. Her story is radically underdeveloped in the books because it was literally added at the 11th hour. So you can, and if you know the books pretty well, you can pretty much smell which are the paragraphs that were added in at the end, in order to retrofit her. Now, Tolkien was a great retrofitter. I mean, he is fantastic at retcon. And so it's not like it's something that's like super awkward and really hurts the book in a lot of ways. But it's pretty clear that her story is I mean, even the fact that he adds the Appendix A story of Aragorn and Arwen as a separate standalone sort of shows, well, it suggests to me very strongly that had he had the time, there was clearly much more he wanted to say about their story as he went on to develop it, and would probably have wanted it to work in. Do I think Arwen would have done nothing but sit back in Rivendell and sew a banner until the time came? No, I don't think that's what the story would have been. Not if Aragorn fancied her,
then she must have been,
there's more going on there. I mean, I'm not saying that she would have been at Helm's Deep as Peter Jackson originally projected or anything, but it is almost impossible for me to imagine that she would have been as absentee a character through the whole story as she is.
That's a nice way
in the published
to
text.
Deal with that, because you were able to tell yourself there's probably some gaps I need to fill in there too. That's helpful.
Yeah, and I it's one of the things in the Jackson films, or rather like thinking about the making of the Jackson films, it's one of the real opportunities, right? There are multiple occasions on which Peter Jackson and his team are facing like things that Tolkien wanted to do but didn't get a chance to do, right? One of those was integrating the Arwen and Aragorn story into The Lord of the Rings. I totally think that Tolkien would have done that had he had more time, but he didn't. The other, of course, the even bigger example is the entire Hobbit films and the way that Peter Jackson was setting out to integrate the Hobbit story into the whole world and epic, historical trajectory of The Lord of the Rings, which Tolkien also really wanted to do and never ever did. And the Hobbit remained sort of isolated and a sort of unnaturalized citizen of the world of Middle-earth through, still to this day, the Hobbit book still kind of is that. Despite much of the very powerful retcon that he did in other places, to kind of drag it in, especially, of course, the revision to Chapter 5. But anyway, here, Peter Jackson, in adding Arwen stuff to the films, Peter Jackson is actually doing it's one of the places where he's doing a fill in the blank, basically. But it is a fill in the blank that is based on material, some of which Tolkien did write, right? But it's also a kind of what if, right? We're going to make changes to the story, which Tolkien, who knows what changes Tolkien himself might have made, had he integrated that, but he didn't.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it's just... It doesn't need to be definitive. It was just kind of like, wonder how that was. But I mean, as a viewer, I thought she worked brilliantly, and what she did was so powerful and magical, and all these other things that just should go along with elves, which also got me thinking about, I know we're not really huge on comparison right now, but you and I were talking about elves in Rings of Power versus elves in Jackson. And absolutely, like, you see it so strongly through Fellowship and the rest of Jackson's trilogy about how magical elves are. And we haven't seen that yet in Rings of Power. So, Legolas walking on top of snow, the skill that he has with a sword and all of these things that are learned, but still just so much more impactful, I thought, with the Jackson trilogy. But the magical elements are just ever present. I mean, they're just constant. We have all these abilities that other people don't, that we didn't see in Rings of Power.
Even just in things like the Limbus, right?
Yeah. How many did you eat? 4.
Right. And by the way, since last episode, I think Kat Sass on Twitter was pointing out, of course, it is interesting. Literally the very first scene we see of elves in the Rings of Power is juvenile Galadriel with the swan ship, where she's whispering to it. There seems to be magic involved in the making of that ship. So it is interesting. I had forgotten about that. That actually the very, very first thing that we do see does seem to be a scene involving elf magic. So I think maybe I would want to qualify, and there may be other things I'm forgetting too, so I might want to qualify what I said, but I still think it's true, but I would put it maybe more in the sense of the Rings of Power seems to be leaning away from it instead of leaning into it. They're not cutting it, they're not saying it doesn't happen, but more often than not, especially in moments, again, for me particularly, it was episode 8 with the Rings of Power, right? The actual forging the Rings of Power. They seem to be leaning away from magic and towards technology, the line between which is never very sharp in Tolkien. It just isn't. But anyway, they seem to be leaning away from that rather than leaning into it. And that may change. Their leaning may change as things move forward. But yeah. Though I think I agree with Phil that sufficiently advanced origami is indistinguishable from magic. Yes.
That was one of the, I don't want to get negative on it, but that was one of the things that crossed my mind, that like, yeah, we saw magic, but it was almost a gimmick, like, oh, look, she made a boat. Whereas it's just so naturally a part of their being in Jackson and in Tolkien that I preferred it to not be showy. When it happened, you kind of wait, oh wait, what just happened? You know?
Right.
It was nice that it wasn't like, and same with, you and I differ on this, but like Galadriel's sword fight training scene, I struggled with that because I just thought it just looked like a showmanship. You know, it just looked like, look what I can do. And that's not what the elves tend to do. It's very much like, I have mad skills, I don't need to show them off, you know? And it just, Legolas with a sword was just very much more believable than Galadriel with a sword to me. All right, I'll stop hating on it.
And yet, the swordplay in Galadriel's scenes is so much better than the swordplay in Legolas's scenes.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, he's not doing a lot of sword fighting. He does mostly archery.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But
it was the goblin battle in Moria.
Yeah, the fight sequence. Yeah, the fight sequence with like the actual fighting. Not to mention that, like, I don't know, like as somebody who has actually
that's true
done some martial arts instruction, like her teaching was really good. Like she was teaching really, really good lessons and demonstrating it well. Even the showing off that she was doing was clearly pedagogical. Like she was demonstrating, especially in the opening sequence, right, where he's like stabbing at her and she's just twisting and she is illustrating what she then went on to explain about how you win a fight with your feet, and it's about where you're standing, not about, you know, you win with your feet, not your arms. And again, as like a martial artist, I'm like, yeah, preach, preach. That's exactly right. Anyway, so that's why that's what I loved about that scene myself. But anyway, we're
also have like half an hour left, and we're on our first slide.
Yeah, exactly. We had aspirations to get to scenes, and we're not even getting through one character. All right,
cute.
Let's get back to Elrond, because I want to. This has been I am like seeing new vistas of Elrond's character, film Elrond. I'm understanding film Elrond better than I ever have. So I wanna carry on that, and then we can also do some more comparison with the story of Rings of Power Elrond as well, and how they're setting up his character there. So okay, well, obviously we have to go well beyond the Fellowship of the Ring, but Elrond's character. Am I right in recalling that we get nothing whatsoever from Elrond in between the delivery of the sword and the appearance at the wedding?
Hang on, I'm going through my mind palace. I don't think so.
I think that's it, isn't it?
They go through the paths of the dead.
And we get the battle.
Do we get a cut of Arwen and Elrond? I think that's when that conversation happens.
No, I think they've already. I think their conversation happens all because he reports on their conversations to Aragorn when he delivers the sword.
Yes, he does.
So I think all of those Arwen Elrond moments are prior to that.
Yeah. I think you're right, and then he's just there at the end, next to Arwen, watching the kiss.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, right. So the next time we see him is when he shows up at the wedding. Okay. All right. Good. Confirmed. So that's a really fascinating leap there at the end. And that puts a lot of pressure on that appearance, the sword delivery moment.
Yes.
Right. And again, talk about moments that, like, in 2001 made me throw up my hands. Right. I'm like,
wait, with
Elrond shows up with the sword? No, I was just like, what on earth is going on here?
Right. And
I'm like, bring on the clowns. Good grief.
But even as you're building this up, I'm going, right, isn't that a beautiful shot? That's not where you were going at all.
That's not where I was going at all. Yeah. That's not where I was going at all.
That shot, like how it was filmed too, from like on top as his cloak opens up with the sword coming out.
Yeah. No, but my point of bringing that up is I'm leaving that behind, right? Because I want to think about because this is really literally, that is thinking about it in the actual definition of the term. This is a climactic moment for Elrond, right? This is the peak of his character
film
arc.
Elrond.
Yeah, the film Elrond. This is the peak of his. The next time we're not gonna see him again until denouement. Right, like him showing up at the wedding is closure. It's important, but he didn't even say anything. Right, I mean, he does something important, right, which is like, show up, smile, kind of smugly, and then like give way to Arwen, right, which is a big deal, right? And in all of that, they accomplish with marvelous efficiency his complicated emotion in response to that. The facial acting that Hugo Weaving has to do in that scene, just stunning what he does there, right?
So good.
The conflicted emotions there, the like, you have done your thing, and I have, and I am keeping my promise, and I'm changing. A lot of work gets done in that, like, 10 seconds of screen time there at the end. So I'm not trying to downplay the significance of that, and there's an enormous amount of closure that gets done in that little segment. But the business is done, like the actual work of his character is done. That's closure. That's denouement. The main thing is the sword scene. So what? Help me to understand better. Especially thinking about, how much you liked the shots and the reveal and how all that's done. Help me think through how that works, and I'm going to be continuing to leave behind all of my concerns.
That's a lot of pressure, Corey. It's going to take me a little while. I mean, also, I want to like rewatch it sitting next to you so we can talk through it together, because that would help. But from this point, like, I don't know. I think it just kind of falls back into what I said before about Elrond being facilitator, because the only emotive moment we have is with him and Arwen, but that is to drive Arwen forward. We get a real benefit of seeing Father Elrond and what that kind of relationship is like, and I think that's really powerful because it feels very real. And their acting ability is what pulls that off. You can feel the connection between them. It doesn't feel like they're saying lines. So you get that kind of moment. But then we really need the task to happen. So like, we've had emotion to move things along, but then we really need the action to have everybody pick their next step. So he's gotten Arwen to pick the next step, whether he wanted it or not. But now he's getting Aragorn to take the next step. So he's really pushing him into that role. And the only thing that was out of place was this sword, right? So like, sword can be remade, pieces can be reforged, and here I am revealing it to you. Plus I have this message from your beloved. Plus I traveled here myself. One of the most beautiful shots, again, that aerial shot looking down where you
of
see
him coming up
up the switchbacks. And I don't know what it is about that, but it's something about the switchbacks, like visually, just knowing that we've got time. It's like building anticipation, right? We're like, oh. So by the time he gets to the top, and the way he's framed in there too, of like, you have a friend inside, you have a visitor, and it's just all shrouded in this kind of mystery. We've already moved to 2 towers. We said we weren't going to do that, but it is very powerful, I think, when talking about Elrond in that scene. And that is his climax, because we have built up to this. We have decided that we're going to help Middle-earth in this last final way. I have given up my daughter for this love. I will get this sword to the forever king that can solve and save this world. And then I step aside. So it really does feel this like, and not like a falling to disgrace, falling like stepping onto the step and saying peace.
Stepping aside, exactly. Also, there's thinking back to what we were saying before, and this is another element of his travel, right? The significance of him coming himself, which again, like, I had so many problems with, but is his in Rivendell, he was out. They were out. The elves were out, right? And him talking about, like, the list of their allies growing thin, he was not interested in, like, so, let's brainstorm. Where are we going to get some more allies? Like, how are we going to make this happen, right? That's not... What he's doing is explaining, and therefore, this is why I'm out, right?
He wasn't like, what's our next step? He was like, so,
in other words, it's curtains on the elves. That's the only option left. But having come to that all the way, right? Having come himself all the way down to done Harrow, right? He's brought himself to the front lines again, and so there's a show of commitment. Like I've come all this way in the opposite direction of the sea, right?
Yeah.
I am recommitting to the cause because I believe in you, right?
Yeah.
And I'm willing, and I'm giving you this sword because I believe that you are the one and that you can make this happen, and that that, like, basically I now think, unlike what I thought before, I now think that having you among our list of allies maybe changes the situation.
And I think that's really important to see for Elrond, story-wise, character-wise. But I also think we need to remember also the contract that the audience, the viewer, needs to have with these characters. So that moment, once again, is not for Elrond's benefit, although it was been really good to see him kind of build up to his own climax. But that was really for us as viewers to look at Aragorn and see, all right, he's got everything he needs. I am fully behind this as well. Let's go,
Right.
So it really does put the weight of all the belief behind Aragorn and his ability to overcome this.
Right. And the way that it, to kind of slightly shift for a second, but it's still in that scene. And again, thinking about Elrond as facilitator, as you were describing, the significance of that moment for Aragorn, thinking about where that scene fits into Aragorn's trajectory.
Yep.
So film 1 saw the big question, and we were talking about this last time, right? The big question of film 1, it's like, men are weak. Discuss. Right? That's one of the questions, right? So one of the big moments in Aragorn's whole trajectory in the first film builds up to the moment where he folds Frodo's hand closed over the ring and does not take it for himself, right? So that's sort of the first step, where he's proven, okay, he has overcome the weakness of his human heritage, right? And then in the second film, which we didn't talk about last time, but the general arc of Aragorn's character in the second film is him becoming a leader of men, right?
But starting very small, he's not. We're not going to abandon Merry and Pippin to, I forget what he says, a fate, a terrible fate or gruesome fate or something.
Torment, does he say torment and death? That's what he says in the book. Something like that.
But
anyway, I
love that you can see that. So I think that is what he says. So they go after, 2 hobbits first.
Yeah.
We're gonna be valiant and save them. But in that process, those 2 hobbits then become,
Okay, he does say torment and death. There we go. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Good. So yeah, exactly. So he starts off, as you say, small, but he's making a leadership choice, and then we see that kind of grow in his relationship with Theoden, right? And the way that he becomes especially the way then that gets dramatized with his apparent death and then his return, right? And the way and the impact that has on Theoden and his leadership at Helm's Deep, and he's without like displacing Theoden, right? He becomes he's the, sort of...
He lifts up Theoden. And
he lifts up Theoden. Exactly.
He lifts up Theoden, but somehow Theoden still bows to him. It's an amazing shift of power, and we'll get to that one, but... Yeah.
Right. Even thinking about, of course, the famous scene when he sees the beacon light and comes running in and says Gondor calls for aid, right? Just pause and think about that for a second. Like, he's
the messenger.
He's the messenger. He could be. I mean, he could say like, "So Theoden, I am the heir of Isildur. I call for aid." Right? Like right now, I am Gondor and I am calling for it. Instead, in the film, he's just a messenger, right? He does not see himself that way at all. He doesn't speak for Gondor.
Been there, he hasn't, like, if we're talking hero's journey and monomyth and things like that, he is aware of the mantle, but he has not yet put on the mantle. He's not accepted that specific challenge or, risen to that kind of bar yet. He knows it's there. He knows he's probably running towards it, but he hasn't quite accepted it yet.
Yeah, exactly. So that moment then, before the Paths of the Dead, when Elrond shows up with the sword, for film Aragorn, this is the moment when he embraces, I'm going to be king. I should be king. Like
and the way he picks it up too. I mean, if we're talking shots, there's like a hesitation. I love that I remember this. There's like a hesitation of his hand over the hilt, and then he kind of looks up at Elrond and just grabs it. And it's just one swift, like,
right.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, he owns it at that time. Yeah.
And the way that's shot is how you feel. So like, if I want to follow a king who's going to save me from ruin, I mean, not just me, my whole world from ruin, you want him to feel like that, right? So like, seeing him feel like that and lift up that sword fills you, the viewer, and I imagine all of the people of Aragorn and Gondor feel very confident.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's and so it's Elrond who brings about that final transformation. And then, of course, that transformation is then, in a sense, tested, right, in the Paths of the Dead, with the King of the Dead and like the sword of the King of the Dead and everything.
Yes, you have the passing. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. So the passing of the torch. Yeah. You see the passing of a torch from Elrond to Aragorn, but then you have like the sword I want, not legacy, prophecy. You have like the prophecy coming true. So like, if you're pulling in all these little elements of monomyth and stuff too, you've got all these things falling into line. Like, yep, they say it's him. Yep, they say it's him. Yep, they say it's him. Let's go.
Yes.
He is the chosen one.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So that is the moment that is facilitated by Elrond's coming down. He is the one who brings about that transformation, who prompts and encourages that choice. Thinking in monomyth terms, he becomes the mentor figure to Aragorn in that moment. Like he is the Obi-Wan Kenobi.
He really has, because he's doing head and heart, isn't he, too? Because he's bringing the message from Arwen and giving him his blessing as a father figure, saying, I am okay with my daughter giving up her immortality to be with you because you are so incredible. Like, it's somehow this really seamless transition from, all right, you can have my girl, to being, because you are king. I've oversimplified it, but yeah, that kind of line of thinking is really powerful.
And looking back at that moment for a minute, because we kind of skimmed over a little bit the Arwen Elrond stuff that led up to this, that's also the moment where he is showing his own change and his own progress. Like he first models the change for Aragorn himself, right? And it's Arwen who has done it.
That's nice.
Even going back to the bit, which from a book standpoint, I would still put, I think, at the very, very top of my list of things that still befuddle me about the film adaptation. And that is Arwen's link to the ring that he points to in that scene. But not thinking about it at all from a book standpoint and just looking at its function within the story of the film. Its function is, again, in that drama that we were looking at about the elves are leaving Middle-earth, like it's over, game over for the elves, it's time to leave. There's no other choice that we have. I'm sending Arwen on ahead. And what Arwen does, her response is not just like, it's much more than merely like, but Dad, I really want to marry this guy because he's like super dreamy. Like that's...
No, it's kind of pissed.
Yes. Yeah. And her connection to the ring happened when she saved Frodo's life. Again, I still don't understand it, but I don't need to understand it. She made a choice, right? When and that's the point, right? He was saying, we're out. We're not going to commit to this. We're not going to risk losing any more than we've already lost, Mr. Scarred, bitter experience of the last thousands of years. We're out. There's nothing more we can do. This is a zero-sum game. We're out, right? But Arwen she's already committed, both in her commitment to Aragorn and in her, the choice. It's about choice. Think about the way that Arwen's choice is emphasized in her conversation with Aragorn, with the whole, like, I choose a mortal life scene, right? The romantic, bridge scene, right? She chooses a mortal life. She chose to help Frodo, and even that, her agency in that is emphasized through the little mini debate that she and Aragorn have. You know, when Aragorn is like, no, it's too dangerous, and she's like, dude, I'm a better rider than you are anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Anyway, like, knowing what was at stake, she chose to endanger herself in the flight to the ford within the film.
And the hug of whatever life I have, may it be passed to him.
Yes,
So
exactly. That's the moment
gift.
of choice. Yeah, exactly. That's the moment of when that link, I guess, whatever it is established. So what Elrond is faced with is not just like this sort of fait accompli. I mean, it is like she's already chosen. She's chosen Aragorn. She's chosen this. But his realization of this has renewed his own perspective. Right? Basically, where his response to that is like, well, okay, I guess we're in. I guess I'm in. Right? And therefore, here I'm going to schlep all the way down to Dunharrow and bring the sword and facilitate then Aragorn's choice. Because Aragorn, ironically, Arwen's made her choice, but Aragorn still hasn't. Which is why he's trying to refuse the thing, and he's trying to, be like, oh, you should take it back and whatever, and he's trying to not choose or trying to resist that choice until that moment, the moment of Elrond's coming.
I have to think this through another time, but that just made me kind of go, whoa, what if Arwen hadn't made her choice? Would it have affected Elrond's film version? Because her making that choice put her amongst the people of the mortal. So would he have cared as much? Or is it because she's now in Middle-earth forever that he's like, I got to give all the ammunition I can to these people. I got to bring that sword to Aragorn.
But I think it's also in that conversation that she has with him where she kind of shames him, right? And she points out, like, look, you didn't do right by me. Like, you are concealing things. Like, you've basically, evidence shows that you've not been objective in your analysis of this situation. You've chosen the easy path, and you concealed things from me in order to like make me agree with that. I mean, in order to make us all go along with that. That ain't right. And that seems to be one of the things. Very loose paraphrase, of course, but this seems to be one of the things that leads to that. So I don't think it's merely like that. Merely that he's thinking, well, shoot, okay, my daughter's trapped here, so I better make the best of a bad situation. I don't think it's just, again, with the way that she is correcting him, the way that she has put the direction that she is pushing him is not just like, so I've contrived, Dad, to give you no choice about what you do, but rather she instead influences his choice and models his choice for him. And then he follows that. So it's interesting, like Arwen's role in the film, because she's the one who influences the influencer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that becomes her core role in the story as far as we can see. Anyway, yeah, it's yeah, exactly as Druid's Fire is saying here, she's reacting to his nearly open manipulation of her. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And calling him on it. Like, that's the fact that you're doing this is not okay.
And he doesn't even seem that sorry. He's like, no, I was just protecting you. Like, no.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is how, I mean, I can see, and then you think about how this is then reflected, right? How, in a sense, with Elrond serving as the kind of fulcrum or pivot point in the middle, how Arwen's choice ends up leading to Aragorn's choice on the other side, right? Through the influence of Elrond. Because without Arwen's intervention, I don't think there's any way Elrond is reforging the sword and bringing it down to Aragorn. Right? Like,
who knew? I have never thought about it that way. 20 years.
Yeah. I think that seems to be, see, thinking about the movie is fun.
I don't even care that we're only on, like, the background. I was kind of like, I can't believe we're only on slide 1. And then I was like, oh my God, we're only on slide 1. We get to do this forever, Corey. Like,
Yeah.
because the next 2 weeks are already planned out, so like it's not going to be until like the middle of February that we get to come back to this, and then we're just going to be on side 2. And oh my god, we're gonna have so much fun.
Yeah, exactly. But no, so okay, so let's hang on a second then. Since we only have 15 minutes left anyway, let's
Lean in.
let's lean into the Elrond thing. So, which do you want to do? Compare and contrast Jackson film Elrond and Rings of Power Elrond, or compare and contrast Jackson film Elrond with book Elrond?
Oh, I want to do all the things. Well, book to Jackson, I feel like is what we're telling people not to do, but I think it's really
okay.
vital.
Like it would be okay to do it now, like
Yeah, and
after we've discussed this.
I also think it's vital for our discussion of adaptation. I think it's interesting to compare to Rings of Power because it's fresh in all of our minds, and we've been talking about it a lot. So I don't want to spend too much time reflecting back to Rings of Power, I guess. I think that conversation of book to film is more...
Okay. All right. So let's think then, Elrond's role in the book. What is Elrond's role in the book? And just as we were thinking about like the moments... Now, Elrond's character is... I mean, obviously he's not a continuous character throughout the story. So where do we see Elrond's influence happening? And actually, the periods of time in which Elrond is absent from the narrative are very much longer in the book than they are in the film, right? The film keeps us in contact with Elrond, not only because of the intervention of his actual appearance, bringing the sword, right? But all that extra stuff with Arwen, which, of course, is nowhere in the books. So what we get... yeah, all right. Elrond's role in the book. We meet him and spend a good deal of time with him. I mean, Council of Elrond is a good deal of time all by itself, right? It's a hugely long chapter, and Elrond is a very central figure in that. He is really running that meeting. And after discussing the Council of Elrond for 2 years-ish recently, I think I actually have to differ. I still appreciate Tom Shippey's joke about Elrond, he has made many times, is that Elrond in the Council of Elrond is like a really, really bad department chair at a department meeting. And I understand the joke that he's making. Like, the joke that he's making is he's like a department chair that calls a meeting and then starts off by talking for 2 hours before they even move on to the agenda. Like, that's true, and that's a legitimately funny joke, and I totally get that. However, looking at the Council of Elrond as a whole, I actually think Elrond does a really good job chairing that meeting, and handles it and manages it really, really well, to exactly the outcome that he and Gandalf, I think, alike.
A lot of dynamics in that room.
There are, and he I think manages it pretty skillfully. But anyway, okay, so we get that, and that's a big thing. He appears. We get appearances from him on the chapters on either side of that. In the many meetings chapter at the beginning of book 2, when Frodo wakes up in Rivendell, we don't get a lot of him, but we get him a few times. We get sort of him placed in his setting, right? The kind of, in my opinion, sort of core, like, take home Elrond moment from many meetings is that, like, him singing in the Hall of Fire. Like, we see him in place as the Lord of Rivendell, and he's a big deal, right? And how much of a big deal he is emphasized in a couple different ways. We learn other things about him, like the way that he jokes with Bilbo is extremely endearing, and we see things about his personal relationships there as well. But anyhow, so that's kind of how he gets established at the beginning. Then we get him managing the council. After the council, we get him at the beginning of The Ring Goes South, and we see him foreseeing things, right? Talking about foreseeing their path and decreeing things like there should totally be 9 of you in this company. Like, that's a thing that needs to happen, that he decrees, right? Because he knows this is one of the things that Elrond is associated with consistently throughout the book is foresight. he's the one. He doesn't exactly know the future. Like, he doesn't, have a day planner that extends, 5 years into the future, but he can see things.
Yeah.
And he can see things afar, both in space and time. Anyway, so, and that's how he, even though he himself never shows up again, he doesn't show up until the wedding from there, in as far as physical appearance in the narrative. However, his presence is felt at other times, and it's primarily this is of course most notable in the moment which is the analog to the sword delivery moment, when his sons Elladan and Elrohir come down with the rangers from the north, with the Grey Company, and meet up with Aragorn and give him not the sword but the banner of the king that Arwen has made, and give him a message. Like, Aragorn is also, it's also a turning point for Aragorn's character in the book as well. Not the same turning point, of course. It's not at all in the book about, like, I think I'm going to go claim the throne of Gondor now where I was uncertain before. Like, that's not the case. But Aragorn is at a moment of uncertainty. What should he do? What role should he play? What direction should he go in? Like, what should be his next actual physical destination? But more importantly, like, what role am I supposed to play in this? What should I do next? Basically, is really his. And when he receives the message from Elrond through Elladan and Elrohir, he knows what to do, and it's about the paths of the dead. Go into the paths, go through the paths of the dead. You should go through the paths of the dead, and also this also leads him. The immediate consequence of this is the moment in the book when he reveals himself to Sauron in the Palantir.
That was great.
The turning point that he makes is like the turning point of Aragorn's career that message from Elrond brings about. Again, it's not the same turning point, but it is a turning point. It's the moment when Aragorn decides, okay, my days of lurking in the shadows and keeping a low profile so that Sauron doesn't notice me are over. It is now time for me to unfurl the flag, stand up tall, yell at the top of my lungs, and it's time to move to the front of the room. And this is not only a big change for Aragorn personally from what he's been doing through his whole life to that point, but it's a choice that was made hundreds of years ago by his ancestors, ever since the fall of Fornost, when the chieftain of the Dunedain as a whole and their chieftains have been keeping this low profile. Let's not claim the throne. Let's not, ever since Arvedui and the death of Arvedui, the last king, they're like, let's keep it low key. Let's help everybody to forget that there is a remnant of the Númenóreans from the north. And this, as we can see in Bree, seems to be generally successful, right? They don't have any idea. He's just a ranger, right? And yes, that's when they sent their heirs to Rivendell for fostering Phil from then on.
And I'm interjecting there because that was a lovely line that I enjoyed the relationship building when they said that, because you understood the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen then much more as well. So, he grew up there. He speaks Elvish. Like, he's part of that community, and how powerful that was with his relationship to Legolas. Like, it just built that out, having that one little reference to being, your mother knew that when she sent you here.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's the scene with Aragorn at his mother's gravestone is one of my favorite little additions to the extended edition in the films. But anyway, so okay, so that there's an interesting parallel. Again, it's Elrond's intervention indirectly, right? He doesn't come himself, but the message that he sends does facilitate a really important transitional moment in Aragorn's story. And we do see Elrond sort of influencing things, but he's much more on the back burner throughout most of the story. He plays a much less prominent role. He is very important for setting. He's the one who sets the quest of the ring in motion, and establishes, as it were, the ground rules. He's the one who insists on how important it is that people volunteer for this. Frodo's choice to take up the ring himself is
free will. Yeah.
Hugely important. Yeah. The emphasis on people's free will through the Council of Elrond and afterwards in the beginning of The Ring Goes South, really, really important. So he establishes that really clearly. He sets the company in motion and sort of sets the parameters and ground rules there, which ends up bearing fruit, I think, in important and interesting ways as the story goes on. So he's there at the, I guess I would say, two important transition points in the story. He is one who sort of shifts gears and makes things happen, right? The first one being when the ring comes to Rivendell, and when Frodo is bringing the ring to Rivendell, at the start, right? The journey from Bag End to Rivendell, he's done. That's the goal. When Frodo gets there with the ring, having brought the ring to Rivendell, his job is finished.
We've done what we set out to do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. His job, as far as he knows, his job is finished. And it's Elrond, through the council and his careful management of the council, which brings about Frodo's volunteering to become the ring bearer and to take the ring. So the pivot from let's take the ring to safety in Rivendell to actually no, let's take the ring to Mount Doom to destroy it. That's Elrond's first and primary job in the plot, I would say, of The Lord of the Rings. And then that secondary one is the little tweak that he gives to Aragorn's career trajectory, the little pointer, right? Yeah. The little cue that he gives to him there at the end. Jesse has a really interesting question. Does Elrond presumably ever have a ring temptation moment? I think he has to have had, but it happened off screen. I mean, he must have had it when Frodo was lying there wounded and he was treating Frodo's wound and the ring is still around Frodo's neck. He has to have had it. But yeah, I think he would. But yeah, he obviously passed it, but we never saw it. And that itself is actually kind of an interesting thing. Like, he's never personalized as a character. If he had had a ring temptation moment, we would have learned more about, like, what he was thinking and feeling.
Right. Well, and he was there originally. So, like, to be in its presence again, I imagine would be crazy powerful.
But here's the really interesting thing.
Phil, I love that point. Sorry. Someone put the ring on a new chain.
Someone put the ring on a new chain.
Somebody had to.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. Okay. So here's the really cool thing. In both the book and the film, we get an emphasis on I was there, Gandalf, right? Like the fact that Elrond was an eyewitness of what happened at the Battle of the Last Alliance is significantly emphasized in parallel scenes, not identical by any means, but in parallel scenes in the two works. However, what the book and the film do with those connections are almost completely opposite. When the connection is made in the book, it is at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring when Frodo has this sudden, like, realization. Elrond is telling the stories of the Last Alliance, right? And Frodo's listening along as if, he's just like, yeah, well, this is, I'm getting this story told. This is like a cooler, more detailed version of this story than I've ever heard. And then Elrond has this little aside where he's like, yes, I remember the banners as they were, on the day that we met. And Frodo has this holy crap moment where he's like, he's like this mind blown moment where he's like, whoa, you were there? And he actually says it out loud. He's like, I thought that was a long time ago. And Elrond's like, yeah, totally was. And I was there. And by the way, I remember even long back before that. And so the moment that we get is this awe, this like, he's this larger than life figure. It distances him from like personal feelings, right? It's like, it's about establish like the connection establishes him as this epic figure of story in the flesh in front of us, right? Sitting in the room.
So far in the other category.
Very much of an other, like so far other that Frodo can't even parse it, right? Yeah, he can't even process it. Whereas when movie Elrond starts going, "Oh, I was there, Gandalf," right? What we're getting is his feelings, right? We're getting a window into his personal reactions to things. We're learning about his personality and his psychological profile that helps us to understand him as a person moving forward. And that, as I said, is almost exactly the opposite of what Tolkien accomplishes in the parallel moment, right? Which is fascinating, and is so. Notice the process that we've come to, because I'm trying to do something vaguely concluding as we're coming up to the end of our time. Notice this process by looking carefully at Elrond in the film on his own terms, right? On just on the terms of the films, and thinking about that, and then thinking about book Elrond on its own terms, and then comparing and contrasting the two. There's much more we could do to compare and contrast. My feeling is, instead of saying, well, when you really look at it in context, the differences are the differences are more profound, actually. Like, film Elrond, like if those two characters are further apart in my head than they were before we did this analysis. And yet, that does not make me feel that like movie Elrond, so like this shows that movie Elrond is even more wrong than I thought at first. It's not about that at all. Instead, you get to see like, okay, so what are the choices that they're making? How is that story working? And how do these choices that they're making for Elrond fit into, like, how do they work in that story, right? I mean, I think back to the more superficial things that like annoyed me in 2001, right? Like Grumpy Elrond. Grumpy Elrond annoyed me. I was annoyed by Grumpy Elrond. I'm like, Elrond is kind as Christmas. You're getting Elrond wrong, right? Which would be
really hard if you had a friend who was lovely and then somebody told you they were horrible. That's really hard to deal with. So like all of these feelings are valid. It's just recognizing that people can see things different ways and they can still be right to those people.
Yeah. So seeing how the different choices that they're making are fitting into the story that they're telling, we can now back up and like, in the end, I feel like comparison and contrast almost breaks down. And again, I'm left with merely having to say, okay, I can appreciate these two stories. They're very different stories. And they're both doing interesting things. And they both work on their own grounds really well. Both are good stories. They're very different stories. But, yeah.
And that's when it's interesting to just kind of think about what we have to accomplish and how. And you do have more time with a book, you know, and it's not saying we have to sacrifice something, we have to cut that, but it is a little bit of that. So, you know, what do we need from Elrond? We need to not have all of that other and nuance. We need to have like impact, which so they're not cheapening the character.
No,
they're
and
shaving him down to nothing.
They're doing different nuance. It's not no nuance. They're doing different nuance. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's now, I mean, of course, at the end of the day, it still is okay to try to ask that question. How well does this story fit as an adaptation of the original? But I feel like even after this discussion, we're still not at the point where I'm ready to try to answer that question.
That's still
because
not
I can't
question.
take this. Yeah.
That's still not the question for me. I don't know.
I know. I hear that. And I am increasingly willing to just let it go and not even ask the question. But I feel like I'm willing to ask people to stop calling things right or wrong if they make changes. I'm not willing. I feel like it's too much of an ask to ask people to stop even asking, like, is it faithful at all? Like, is it like, what is the relationship between the book and the film?
Well, no, and as we've said a million times before, it's really interesting because the things that you balk at are usually where there's something for us to take a look at, you know?
Yeah.
So if there's something that makes you go, oh, I love that, and you're going, oh, I hate that. Oh, tell me why. I can't believe you picked that scene with Aragorn grabbing the sword because, like, we came at that. I didn't know where you were going, and it was totally different.
Yes,
that's great.
absolutely.
And to me, that's just a joy. You know, like, I know some people are so angry when they see somebody with a different perspective, but I just think it's so cool when somebody has a different perspective of a moment from a text. Granted, I'm on the happy side of this. So if somebody came to me with Susan Cooper's Dark is Rising and said, oh, I love that adaptation, I would struggle. I would struggle real hard.
Right. So being on the unhappy side of the equation, as you said.
Yeah. When you're on the happy side, it's always a little bit easier. So.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Anyway. Also, Phil said earlier, has Maggie never watched an episode of Exploring Lord of the Rings? Of course I have, Phil, but the whole point was that I was supposed to be able to rein him in, and that's not possible. Why on earth does anybody try to have structure? I will say, though, we can do it when we need to, but we don't need to.
The point is, we have discovered a structure. It's not may not be the structure we thought of in advance, but that's okay. It's it's a voyage of discovery.
And I feel so much better with this structure, knowing that we had like 7 or 8 things prepared. We had 7 or 8. Should we have blown through them and panicked and not filled time? That doesn't happen. But now we have 7 weeks
but
ready.
So next time we get back to Peter Jackson, we're going to talk about Galadriel. We're going to think about the Galadriel stuff. And we can also think about Rings of Power Galadriel. And that's going to be inevitable thinking about
basically
that
what we just did today, but we'll do it with Galadriel.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And then we've got a couple of scenes that we'll talk about as well. But we're not doing Ring Fellowship for a little while.
That won't be for a while. So we're not going to do next week at all because I'm going to be in Australia next week. So no broadcast next week. The week after, is that when we're doing Dune? That's Dune. So so we have 2 guests from the Signum community that will be joining us. So we are going to discuss. They've got a book coming out. I think it's Critical Essays, isn't it? So we've got a copy of that to read through as well as our homework. And we're going to talk about Dune Adaptation. So the more recent one, we'll probably reference the other one, but I feel like we should focus on the one that's happening now. Yeah. We can talk about that. I'll try to rewatch both the Lynch Dune and the recent one again. The second one comes out this year? I think it's this year. Yeah. I'll have to check. I think it's filming, but I feel like I haven't heard anything about it in a while. Just want to make sure I didn't miss it. I do that sometimes. I don't pay attention. So I understand. But yeah, okay. So I'll rewatch Dune Part 1, the new Dune Part 1, and I'll rewatch the David Lynch because that's fun. And then after that, the next 2 after that, Corey and I are going to be in the same place. That's right. You're coming back. We're coming back to New Hampshire. Studio Lab. Back to Studio Lab. What's up, gang? Yes, I'm going to go visit some family for a bit, and that's nearby Studio Lab. So we're going to do some shows there, and we'll see if we can get some special guests. And if not, then we'll bring back the next installment of Jackson. Yep. Yeah. Sounds good. Worst case scenario is a Galadriel discussion from Studio Lab. Which is, will be just fine. That does not suck. Just imagine the board behind us. So many images. Oh man, that's right. We're gonna get images on the board for Dune. No, not for Dune. For Jackson stuff after. Awesome. Well, okay. Only if the studio is available. No pressure. No pressure. Studio Lab. Yeah, that's right. Well, they have another one. They built another wall since we filmed Rings and Realms, so we could be in Studio B and still. Well, I know Ben's watching, so noted. just saying. Thanks, Ben. Awesome. That'll be fun. Awesome. Very cool. Okay. So thanks everybody for joining us. This was I feel like I learned so much today. This was really right back awesome. At you. Yeah. This is so fun to talk about with you, and so fun to see the chat with you guys as well. So thanks everybody for joining in and being friendly and not crucifying me for not knowing certain things. Awesome. All right. Very good. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you guys in a fortnight for Dune discussion and then more after that. So thanks, everybody. Bye now. Take care.